Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place, said the Red Queen to Alice. It takes all the printing you can do to keep in the same place, said the banksters to Bernanke. It takes all the working you can do to keep in the same place, said the neo-feudal facts to the chumps who have to work for a living. But I say not only does it take all the running, printing, and working, but it also takes all the bombing, stealing, and defrauding, spying, lying, and dying, shaking, baking, and taking to stay in the same frickin' placey. Isn't that right, Stacy?
Well, in fact, as you mentioned, we have to print, and we're printing just to keep even on GDP. In, Fed, and out, many now think inflation helps. The Fed has worked for decades to suppress inflation, but economists, including Janet Yellen, President Obama's nominee to lead the Fed starting next year, have long argued that a little inflation is particularly valuable when the economy is weak. Rising prices help companies increase profits. Rising wages help borrowers repay debts. Inflation also encourages people and businesses to borrow money and spend it more quickly.
Well, this is stupid, because, in other words, the Fed, the program of quantitative easing, and there's been 1, 2, 3, and 4 in Japan, in America, in the UK. The whole point of it, the design of it, the reason we have it is to increase inflation.
Yes.
Now, this has been going on, if you count Japan, for 20 years. Now, in the New York Times, they're saying, well, you know what, maybe we need to increase inflation. They've been trying to increase inflation for 20 years. The Bank of England has increased their balance sheet by 400%, attempting to create inflation. The Federal Reserve Bank has printed trillions and trillions of dollars trying to create inflation. But they don't understand that when they print, they actually cause deflation because of the sudden financial repression that occurs when you foist onto an economy hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of unpayable debt, causing things like Cyprus to blow up, or for Greece to blow up, or for the wages in the UK and America to collapse. That's all caused by the deflationary effect of money printing. So now the New York Times says, well, maybe we need a little inflation. Let's print some more money. This truly is an Alice in Wonderland moment. I don't know, they are of no help whatsoever to having people understand that money printing causes deflation, and therefore, and the deflation's getting worse, and more money printing is going to cause more deflation.
Well, you also mentioned defrauding in the opening, and that's our banking system is a black hole of fraud, and the fraud is sucking in more and more fraud, and sucking in all the newly created money is going into this black hole. In fact, the more you print, the more you incentivize more fraud, which is deflating the economy, the real economy, faster and faster.
Yeah, let's be clear about something. Although prices of stuff at the shops and education and healthcare are going up 3, 4, 5, 6%, the rate of balance sheet implosion on the central banks and commercial banks' balance sheets is imploding by a greater rate. It's just not visible. It's not reported. Why do you think Jamie Dimon had to pay a huge multi-billion-dollar fine? That's a deflationary event to cover the fact that his balance sheet isn't worth the belly button lint that he's smoking. So the Fed has to print money, but the money's not collateralized by anything because the economy is shrinking. So the implosion is happening, but it's happening in a way that's not visible to the general public because these frickin' jackasses at the New York Times say, maybe we need a little inflation. Maybe you need to put a gun to your head and pull the trigger and blow up the kingdom come because you are too stupid to be on the face of this earth.
Well, of course, the thing that backs all of the dollars, backs all of these new debts being created is oil and the military-industrial complex in order to take that oil from around the world.
Take it!
They take it.
They take it! They grab it! They bomb! They take! They bomb!
Well,
they take it, they bomb it, they steal it, they steal the oil.
Well, America might not need to steal it, they think, anymore. Pedro da Costa of Reuters tweets, "Holy frack, the United States will soon overtake Russia as the world's top oil producer." Yes, through the looking glass, they think that they could displaced Saudi Arabia and Russia as the top oil producer because America is now producing 7.8 million barrels of oil per day, the most in a long time. And 30% of that, however, is from fracking. U.S. shale oil boom may not last as fracking wells lack staying power. So they look at Chesapeake Energy's 1-3H well near Oklahoma City, and it came on as a gusher in 2009, producing 1,200 barrels of oil per day, is now down to 100. And the article points out that this is the dark secret in the oil world, is that this whole thing might not last because you have to keep on pumping and pumping and creating new wells in order to sustain, just to keep flat, even in production.
Right, like the Red Queen. You have to keep running to stay in place. And we've said this on this show now for several years. Since the fracking boom started in America, the average lifespan of a fracking well is 12, 24, 36 months tops. But here's the joke. In order to create this fracking boom in America, all these oil companies with the Pentagon by their side went to the Federal Reserve Bank and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, and they borrowed 50, 100, 200, 300 billion dollars because their projections for fracking would go out 20 or 30 years and America would have energy independence, and we're going to really frick it to them Saudis. Oh yeah, boy. Now all the fracking's gone, but the debt's still there. All they did was increase America's debt load by another trillion. Oh, the debt ceiling went up by another trillion? That's right. Is it going to go up another 5 trillion? Oh yeah. Same thing going to happen in the UK? You bet. Why? Because they're all freaking functionally brain dead. And they all need to be euthanized, or this economy is going to create human species-wide extinction.
Well, this is shale oil they're talking about in this article, not shale gas. And it also, like shale gas, requires constant new wells to emerge. So it relies on the very first story we're talking about, this never-ending printing and this never-ending purchasing of U.S. government debt by the Fed and recycling this into the corrupt banking system. So it relies, they all rely on each other to keep on spinning and spinning and spinning as fast as possible. And they're producing at breakneck speed, all of these oil wells at the moment. And David Hughes, a geoscientist and president of Global Sustainable Research, has examined the lifespan of shale wells. The Red Queen syndrome just gets worse and worse, he says. The higher production goes, the more wells you need to offset the decline. So in the US alone, this year, they need to drill 6,000 wells just to keep pace with the old wells declining. And they, within the first year of the shale oil wells, declined by 70% within the first year.
Well, okay, let's talk about how deflation works in this context. The cost to drill a well is higher than the GDP that results from burning the oil that comes from that well. And this is a negative feedback loop that creates debt and more deflationary pressures. The amount of energy it takes, the cost of the energy it takes, because of course, drilling for oil needs energy, and the cost of that energy, which is run by oil, as oil prices go up, is greater than the amount of energy that you're pulling out of the ground. The amount of credit that you need to finance these wells is greater than the credit that's being created as a result of GDP growth tied to an income, tied to a taxable revenue that would be a sustainable economy. So again, this is suicide economics. These are suicide bankers. They strap on the fracking vest. They go down to Oklahoma, they pull the pin, and they blow them frickin' selves up. And they don't care who they kill in the process. They're suicide bankers. They're jihadis for Wall Street. There's a complete terrorist operation run by the same frackers in Saudi Arabia, as in America, as in anywhere else in the world. They're fracking nuts.
The amount of capital required just to keep even, just to produce these new wells, is $35 billion per year. And research from the same group, the Global Sustainability Research, shows that the newest wells aren't as productive as those drilled in the first years of the boom, a sign that oil companies have already tapped the best spots, which means, of course, that next year, instead of 6,000 new wells, you'll need 12,000, and after that, 24,000, and after that, 48,000.
Well, of course, to frack, you need water.
Yes.
And water is a scarce resource, a lot scarcer than oil or gas. But thank God, because Bill Gates and the Gates Institute has solved the problem. It's called freeze-dried water. All you do is add water. And you have all the water you want. Thank you, Bill Gates, you're a genius. You predatory monopolist, twice convicted, intellectual property whore!
So they speak to Art Berman, a petroleum geologist, and he says, I look at shale as more of a retirement party than a revolution. It's the last gasp. And yet, you look at the mainstream media in America, and they're like, holy frack, we're the best! We're producing more oil! And all the geologists, the experts are, and in fact also the experts in banking are looking at this and saying, wow, this is a bigger sinkhole than Jamie Dimon's derivatives book.
Well, this is obviously what Jesus wanted. And the Tea Party down there in Oklahoma and Texas get the phone call from Jesus, and he's told them directly that Jesus wants them to frack. And that's why in America they've started to arm fetuses, because this way, if anyone tries to abort them, they can shoot their way out.
Now, one of the biggest oil companies in the world, Shell, is in the news about this alternative energy, and that is Peter Vosser says he regrets Shell's huge bet on U.S. shale. Peter Vosser said the failure of Royal Dutch Shell's huge bet on U.S. shale was a big regret of his time as chief executive of the company. And they've written down billions of dollars on this. Again, the deflationary spiral of this running over and over, faster and faster, defrauding faster and faster, printing faster and faster to stay exactly in the same place with 0.1% annual GDP growth.
That's exactly right. It's a net deflationary boondoggle, as exemplified by this Shell executive articulating what I have just been saying, except in a way that requires him to get a bonus that would be equal to the Queen's annual budget for her corgis. I think you're right, Stacy Herbert. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Portland, Oregon, speak with Gregor Macdonald of Gregor.us. Gregor Macdonald, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Max, it's great to be back.
All right, Gregor Macdonald is a retiring CEO of Shell Oil, said that his greatest regret is investing in U.S. shale oil and gas. What does he know that the enthusiastic mainstream media in America doesn't?
Yeah, that was an amazing admission on behalf of the CEO of Shell. Just a little background, Max. Shell is already in a very good position for the emerging global trade in liquefied natural gas. It has very good global infrastructure in that regard. But unfortunately, what Shell did in U.S. tight oil and natural gas shale regions is it came in too late to the game and it paid too high a price. And that resulted in an unfortunate economic outcome, if you will, for them, for both natural gas and in tight oil. In natural gas, they certainly have good assets here in North America, but as you will have noticed, natural gas prices have failed to really rise or rally or reprice to a higher level yet. We're still wallowing around in the sub $4 region for a million BTU. In the oil area, where Shell just had some big write-downs because of their properties in tight oil, in the oil area, what happened for Shell is they realized that these assets don't scale enough for a super major. Remember, Max, the tight oil revolution, to use that word, which is a popular word, the tight oil revolution has been wonderful for independent oil companies, smaller oil companies, for whom this new production really adds meaningfully to their bottom line. For a super major like Shell, it really didn't make a lot of sense for them to try to come into these regions. But I want to make a larger point here, Max, which goes more directly to your question. What did Shell find out that the media doesn't quite understand? What Shell found out is that the economics of the shale regions are much more precarious than the public knows. If we should ever see oil fall to $80 a barrel for any length of time, the kinds of properties that Shell purchased really won't be worth much at all. And I think the point here, Max, is that in these shale regions, the economics are, it's tight oil, the economics are tight, if you will. And as long as oil is at or above 100, we'll have continued production, but it's going to be very hard to expand meaningfully production if oil were to fall again. And of course, as we're talking today, oil is on the weaker side as we head into the end of, as we head into autumn here.
Gregor Macdonald, let's talk specific numbers here. How much does a barrel of the 7.8 million barrels of oil produced per day in the U.S. cost in terms of capital and energy to extract today versus just 10 years ago?
Okay, well, this is, trying to quantify that comparison is not particularly easy. Again, just a little background here. Max, as you may know, we've had a lot of cuts to government funding, and our data gathering agency, which is known as the Energy Information Administration, they used to produce better data on these financial comparisons, but unfortunately, that's one of the areas that the EIA has cut. However, what is perhaps most helpful for your audience to understand is the following, Max. When oil was rising in 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, U.S. oil production was falling. In other words, $40 oil, $60 oil, $80 oil was not enough of a firm price to give even independent operators of oil and gas here in the United States enough confidence to go out and explore for new oil. It was only when oil securely repriced, not at the first time above $100 a barrel in 2008, but when oil came back and repriced more firmly at $100 in 2010, that you began to see U.S. oil production rise. So I think the best way to think about this, Max, in terms of what the capital costs are per barrel, we have got to have at minimum $90 oil in this country, and really, frankly, $100 oil, to give confidence to a oil CEO that he can go out and invest and earn a profit on a new barrel of oil. And as I said, I think it's going to be it would be a wonderful test if we could see oil fall maybe to $80 or $75 a barrel for a short period of time, to see what kind of supply response we get from the shale regions and the Bakken and the Eagle Ford and so forth. So again, this story, it's a very exciting story. It's putting a lot of people to work. Well, of course, it's putting a lot of people to work because it costs a lot of money to get these barrels out of the ground. These are much more expensive barrels than they were 10 years ago. So it's a very exciting story, but it's going to be a different kind of story if for some reason oil were to become depressed in price for 6 or 9 months.
Well, Gregor, let's talk about the crazy world of economics these days, because price of oil is high, relatively speaking, and of course the oil and gas business is an extremely capital-intensive business, meaning that these companies borrow a lot of money. Interest rates are at 30-year lows, historic lows, 200-year lows in America, 300-year lows in Britain. So here you have an industry reliant on cheap credit to go out there and buy oil and gas, presumably to fuel an economy that's growing. However, all that credit that's being created by the central bank and others is actually having the effect of depressing the economy. Wages are down. GDP, adjusted for the price of oil, is negative in both the UK and the US. So what kind of psychotic economic model are we talking about here? Because they can drill all they want and they can frack all they want, but they're playing a game of the end game, essentially. It looks like they're just trying to get as much as they possibly can before people wake up to the fact that we hit peak credit, we hit peak oil, game over, and these guys will be on a tropical island somewhere sipping a Mai Tai, and there will be nowhere around to take responsibility for all this.
Well, Max, we're definitely in the late phase of global oil production. This late phase comes at a time when, as you said, we've got fairly grotesque wealth inequality now emerging in the OECD and in the United States in particular. In fact, just to your point, Max, I don't know if your audience is aware of this, but the United States measurement of inequality, the Gini coefficient index, is really on the threshold of rising past the Gini coefficient index in Brazil. Max, you and I are old enough. We remember when Brazil used to be the global poster child for wealth inequality, the super rich living in high rises down in the cities of Sao Paulo, and the poverty, poor people living up in shacks in the hillsides. The United States it's incredible for me to think about this. The United States is actually about to have wealth inequality at worse levels than the country of Brazil. So what's happening in this world of $100 oil and in this world of wealth inequality is that oil is being transferred and shifted to the parts of the world that can still afford a barrel of oil. But of course, here in the United States, we've got each year that goes by, we've got tranches and tranches and tranches of Americans who are no longer using oil. We're giving up our second cars, we're getting back on bicycles. Even in Europe, I believe that bicycle sales, in fact, are outpacing automobile sales in most European countries. So, you know, there's grotesque outcomes to this, Max. I mean, there's also some good ones. Air is getting a little bit cleaner in the OECD because we're burning less coal and burning less oil. But you're right, Max. The energy transition that kicked off with the oil shock in 2008 is still with us. Peak oil, in terms of the end of cheap oil, is still with us. And the economy is sort of perma-constrained as a result, and we're in a phase of stagnation. And in this phase of stagnation, wealth inequality and wealth disparity is expanding, and it's expanding rapidly.
Yeah, but Gregor, what I'm trying to get at here is that the higher price of oil is sending a completely false signal, because the higher price of oil is not signaling robust economic growth. The high price in oil is signaling money printing by the central banks at artificially low interest rates, and it's signaling that you've got the kleptocratic class around the world buying stuff like oil, chateaus in France, and assets that are being financed with ultra cheap money. That's a false price signal. So at the other end of this false price signal, you have an economy like in the U.S. that will never, as you point out, with the Gini coefficient as wide as it is and worse than Brazil, there's never going to be a scenario where the GDP growth in America results in the taxable revenue needed to pay the debt to finance this oil exploration. This is a suicide mission, because the oil price at $100 or higher does not indicate economic growth. It indicates out of control speculation. Where am I getting that wrong?
I know what you're saying, Max, because what's happened is oil used to be almost like a democratic kind of energy resource in the post-war, in the 20th century era. You know, the rich man bought oil, and the poor man bought oil. Oil is becoming either a rich man's fuel in the West, or it's being distributed more broadly in Asia, except that those populations are using only a very small amount of oil. And you're right, high oil prices used to send a signal of robust economic growth. But Max,
now wait a minute, let me cut in there for a second, because you're saying that the price of oil is a rich man's luxury at this point. But I'm saying that you've got firms like Goldman Sachs and others who, when the price is at a certain level, will fill up tankers, hundreds of tankers all over the world, and just storehouse oil as a way to protect their asset, because that asset's used as collateral to fund more levered schemes that are involved in mergers and acquisitions and other tricks on Wall Street, where they use the cheap money collateralized by oil that they're hoarding and warehousing. They're not even putting it into the real economy as a way to finance this Ponzi scheme that's become the global economy. So oil is not really a utility anymore. Oil is a bargaining chip for this global Ponzi scheme and kleptocratic class that can warehouse tankers full of it all over the world when they feel like it. They can parse it out to individuals that they're when required, but as a price signal telling us what the economy is doing, it's shot. It tells us nothing. It's a complete false signal. Where am I wrong?
Well, Max, I don't disagree that oil has been increasingly monetized as an asset over the past decade. Where I differ with some of the models which show that oil prices are where they are because of this monetization is I'm much more on the geology side of the explanation. In other words, the floor under oil prices is really because of geology, not because of speculation. But that doesn't.
Yeah, but there's a geology involved in diamond mining and gold as well. I'm just saying, okay, you can say it's scarce because there's less of it, but it's no longer part of the global matrix of economic indicators and price signals as it relates to how to grow an economy, because these economies are not growing, and oil's got nothing to do with it. It's all about printing money. But unfortunately, we're out of time, Gregor. We'll have to have you on again soon. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Okay, thanks, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Gregor Macdonald of Gregor.us. If you'd like to get in touch, please tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.